We want to take this opportunity to once again thank you, our patrons and listeners, for sticking with us all these years. With nearly 800 episodes and counting, we couldn't have done this without listener feedback, patrons providing support, those of you who reach out and say, hey, we like what you're doing, keep doing it. Makes it fun, keeps us energized, helps us, gives us the ability and the want to add interviews like what Jason provides. So we would be remiss if we did not continually say thank you for you, the listener, and you, the patron, who've gone out of your way, went over to patreon.com/comics fun profit and signed up at any level to get involved with our Slack channel, to support us, to get early access, ad-free access, unedited access to us. We really appreciate it, and thank you.
Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing a friend of the show, writer Alisa Kwitney. She's here to promote G.I.L.T. It's a trade. It's now out in trade paperback from Ahoy Comics magazine. Now, I'm going to read a quote from IGN that's on the trade paperback. It is not every comic that can be described as a fusion of the Golden Girls, Sex in the City, and the Twilight Zone, but that sums up G.I.L.T. in a nutshell. So, Alisa, welcome back to Comics for Fun and Profit. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and someday I hope I will actually get to visit you in Hawaii.
Oh, so comic convention organizers, you heard this. Please invite Alisa down, and also Tom Pyre. We have to bring Tom down,
Absolutely.
and and if
I would love that.
and if and if Karen Berger gets wind of this too, I'm sure Karen wouldn't mind to be your assistant at the table, right? Karen will just go,
That
no,
would
I'm
be a role reversal.
um listeners, you guys are in a treat for today. Uh, Before we started recording, me and Alyssa, we were just already having fun. So this is going to be a great episode. It's going to be a very good episode. Now, I'm just going to go over a little bit of Alyssa's
Alisa.
Alisa, I'm sorry, Alisa's history, and I told Alisa, you know, correct me if if I mispronounce her name. Um, so please forgive me on that. Now her parents are Ziva Kwitney, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your mom used to be a writer for women's magazines. Is that correct? In the 70s
Yes,
or 80s?
absolutely. So my mother was a journalist. She wrote for Ms. Magazine and Cosmopolitan. A lot of articles about dating and human sexuality
Mhm.
and psychology. Yes.
And then also your father and Elisa's father is was a science fiction writer. His name was Robert Sheckley, and I hope I got pronounced his last name correctly.
Yes, absolutely. So Robert Sheckley, my dad, was a science fiction writer and known as a humorist and an absurdist. He is considered an influence on Douglas Adams, although Douglas Adams did not did not cop to this.
Mhm.
But if you read Sheckley's early stories, I leave it to you to consider for yourself.
Right. And then also too, she was also a newspaper reporter in Miami. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it in the late 80s, early 90s?
It was yes, it was the late 80s.
Mhm.
And they were basically I worked for two different weekly Jewish newspapers, the Jewish Floridian and the Miami Jewish Tribune. And I think at one point I thought, well, either I'm going to get a job at the Miami Herald or I'm going to go back to New York and go to graduate school and I'll get my MFA in writing. And the Miami Herald said, lots of luck in New York, kid.
Oh, and that's the perfect segue because and correct me if I'm wrong, you were an editor for Vertical Comics. Actually, you're literally in the basement before Vertical Comics started, and then turned into Vertical Comics in the 90s. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I started work at DC Comics. I think it was either 89 or 90.
Mm-hmm.
And I started as Karen Berger's assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, it wasn't called Vertigo. It was just called Karen Berger's strange, horror-tinged, mainly British writer collection of oddballs and geniuses. And yeah, so that was how I started. And I think that Vertigo was really interesting because it was an imprint. It is the imprint that Sandman came out of,
Mm-hmm.
although Sandman again predated the Vertigo branding. So there was already this interesting collection of writers and artists and stories under Karen Berger's editorial watch.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vertigo became a way of sort of describing this thing that already existed.
Okay. And then also too, no, thank you very much. Um, Now, listeners, if you get a chance, please check out Comics for Fun and Profit, episode 733, that was dated on May 11th. In that episode, we talked about guilt number one and um, Alisa's origin story in that episode. Now, before we begin the interview, I just want to give a big shout out to Hannah Bahedri of Superfan Promotions for setting up this interview. Just Hannah, thank you very much for asking us to do a follow-up interview. Um, yeah, just thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you very much, and thank you, yeah, just thank you for all your hard work behind the scenes. Um, Alisa, do you want to do you want to add anything to that?
Oh yeah, I mean Hannah Behedry and David Hyde are just the most amazing PR team. There's a joke that goes around in publishing these
Mm-hmm.
days. There writers have passed this around. There's a letter from supposedly the new head of PR at a major publishing house, and it's someone who's just graduated from college and gives the writer a long list of things that the writer can do, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'm sure you'll be in good hands because I'll be leaving as of next week. And so it's been a while since
Mm-hmm.
I've had such an incredibly proactive and great PR team. Uh, they've been super, really super.
So, and then also too, I want to give a big shout out to um Barbara Dillon. She's a friend of the show. Barbara, um, wrote an article for the Fan Base Press. The article is entitled "Fan Base Press Interviews with Alisa Kwitney on the release of the collected Guilt trade paperback with Ahoy Comics." That was dated on November 2nd. If you guys get a chance, please check out that article. Now, um, Alisa, now where can listeners follow you on social media?
That has become a stickier and stickier question,
Yes,
hasn't it,
yes.
these days? Um, I'm still on Twitter right now at A
Mm-hmm.
Quitney.
Mm-hmm.
I have to confess that until this whole brouhaha, I hadn't even noticed that some people had a blue check and some didn't. And I really, I would, you may be shocked to realize that not many people try to impersonate me. I'm just,
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't occur to me that anyone would.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I am on Instagram and
Mm-hmm.
I don't post as often, but I may have to start doing it more. I think I'm K Witty on
Yes.
Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on Facebook. I think I'm Alisa Kwitney, Alisa Sheckley. So those are
Mm-hmm.
the main places I am. Uh, yeah, and I also have a website, www.alisakwitney.com.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, just walk your dog in Dutchess County, and you'll probably run into me.
All right. No, thank you very much. Now we're gonna just basically jump right in and start talking about guilt. Now, I want to read a couple quotes because one is from I think this one quote is basically inside the trade, and it's quote, "We all have our time machines, don't we? Those that take us back our memories, and those that carry us forward our dreams. And that's from the great science fiction writer H.G. Wells. And for I'm just going to say for some new listeners, he's the author of the classic The Time Machine. And I'm also going to read a quote from Tom Pyre, and it's more towards in the back matter. And it's quote: "When we faced with a choice as to which time travel trope to follow, choose the one that you feel is most fun." Now, for listeners who and Alisa, for listeners, for new listeners or new readers, may I ask, can you tell us, what is this story about?
Sure. So the story is about Hildy Winters, who is a woman in her 70s who lives on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in a wonderful old building called the Bellicent. And the Bellicent is kind of a special building, and Hildy's apartment is rather special too, because when she goes out her back door, down the door that comes out of the kitchen, she travels back roughly 40 years in time, back into her younger self. Now, she has been living in this apartment and attempting to get back and to undo a decision that she made in her 30s. The problem is, first of all, it's not so easy to affect real change in your life in the present or in the past.
Uh-huh.
And the co-op board of the Bellicent has a lot of rules for time travel. The Guild of Independent Lady Temporalists, G.I.L.T, has its rules. You can only be one person, the owner of the apartment, going through. You're not allowed to make major renovations or changes in the past without board approval. And there are repercussions if you do. But so Hildy's been trying and trying to go back and change this decision, and it's finally down to the wire, because you go back in time 40 years, but time does move forward. You can't, it's not Groundhog Day. You can't relive the same day over and over. Complicating matters, Gildy, we discover, has been having some memory issues, and against her will, she's been assigned a home health care aide named Trista. Now, Trista is, I used to say she was the Bill Murray of home healthcare aides. That's become as difficult as Twitter. So I guess I could say she's the what's her name? Oh gosh, I'm she was from The Office.
Oh, oh,
Aubrey Plaza. She's
okay.
the Aubrey
Oh.
Plaza of
Mhm.
home healthcare aides. So Trista really does not want to do any more work than is strictly necessary to get her
Mhm.
job done. But she ends up, trying to prevent Hildy from going into the past, and winds up traveling back in time with her. And all of a sudden, the women are back in 1973. Hildy's in her 30s, and Trista is 9. And
Mhm.
at this point, they both realize that they were together on this day in 1973.
Mhm.
And so first of all, there are weird resonances bringing them together. And second of all, they have broken some major time travel rules, and there are repercussions.
Okay. Um, and then couple of things I wanted to ask, because I know we covered it in the previous, like who Hildy and Trista were. Um, Also, too, Hildy's friends also kind of play a role in the story too, as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I know we can't. I don't want to give out too much spoilers, but right, they kind of play a role in the story as well.
Absolutely. So part of my inspiration for writing Guilt was very pop culture. So I should say that I kind of toggle between writing things that are deeply, painfully, embarrassingly personal, and things which are deeply, painfully, embarrassingly pop culture. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I was very aware of is that Golden Girls, the show about, you know, three women and one of their mothers
Mm-hmm.
living in Miami in the 80s, that, it's this amazing show about female friendship. And then it ends with the main character, played by B. Arthur, getting married, spoiler alert, and leaving not only her friends, but her mother behind. Okay, so
Mhm.
there's the weirdness of that. And then, years later in the 90s, you have Sex in the City, and Carrie Bradshaw, who is the B. Arthur of her group, does the same thing and marries the clearly toxic man that she's been, dating on and off for
Mhm.
years. And I just thought, this is clearly a bad decision. It's bad for us as an audience because
Mhm.
we don't want sitcoms to end. We don't
Mhm.
want them to resolve. We want them to carry on like mythic. I've heard it said that mythic time is a circle and historical time is a line, is
Mhm.
linear. And so we want our sitcoms to exist in mythic time.
Mhm.
It's also clearly a bad decision. You don't leave your friends and your mother, certainly
Mhm.
not when you're in your 50s or 60s, for some dude you just met.
Mhm.
And especially don't do it if you've been dating him for years and clearly, he's got commitment problems and he's been bad for you for a decade or whatever it was.
Mhm.
So I kept thinking, well, surely these women live to regret their choice. And
Yes.
so that was a big part of how I started out with figuring out the plot to Guilt.
Oh, okay. Um, Now we've already, as you already mentioned about, how the Golden Girls ended, how Sex in the City ended. Because my next question is um, because in issue, and we cut, and I remember covering this in our previous interview, but I know in issue one there was a post-it on one of Hildy's, either one of her folders or something, and it's clearly written, "Do not marry the man."
Yes, Do Not Marry Mr. Man. Mhm.
Yes, and then in issue number two, we finally meet and see who Mr. Man is.
Yes.
Um, Actually, I'm going to ask this question because Mr. Man, and I'm not going to, again, not no spoilers, but I was kind of going, he looks a little familiar. Who came up with this design?
So Maurice is my collaborator, my
Mhm.
artist uh art name, like Cher. Um I've always ended up calling him Alan, which is his real first name. So Alan and I have an unusual partnership, I think, because there are, writer artist pairings. They run the gamut from, blind dates where the people were matched up and they barely talk to each other
Mhm.
to they're actually the same person or they're married.
Mhm.
And but Alan and I are really good friends. We became friends through the creative collaboration. And we were paired together. I'll just go back for a moment on
Yes. Yeah.
Mystic You, which was um, it was a mini series, a prestige mini series for DC Comics featuring Zatanna and a bunch of other characters.
Mhm.
And then basically, Alan, the first Mystic You took a long time to come to fruition, and Alan ended up leaving when it wasn't it didn't look like it was going anywhere. And so Mystic You happened with the wonderful Mike Norton, and
Yes.
we
Mhm.
had, I mean, that was wonderful working with him. But Alan and I felt very frustrated that we hadn't gotten to work together, and
Mhm.
we began this weird long process of long distance talking and zooming and meeting
Mhm.
when we were in New York or in San Diego together. And we just enjoyed talking, enjoyed collaborating,
Mhm.
and we did a lot of back and forth.
Mhm.
So I think all the characters and all of the designs, it was so collaborative. So
Mhm.
I would say, I was thinking about this. And he would say, well, what about this? And we
Yes.
doodle each other and make faces over Zoom. And we always found something that was felt right to both of us.
Mhm.
And it was, I think the fun of it was, it was almost like being improv partners because the fun of it
Yes.
was tossing something back and forth until we had something that we both resonated with.
Mhm. That is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you and Alan finally were able to work together on 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 a
Sinister
on a
Terror.
short story with on from one of the Ahoy comics. Is that correct? Or
Actually, we did one thing before then.
okay.
Shelley Bond had this great book, Femme Magnifique, which
Hmm.
featured a lot of women in comics. And so we did a story that was about Carrie Fisher.
Oh.
And
Hmm.
so we did a short with that. And then we did Snifter of Terror.
Hmm.
We did, so for those who don't know, I mean, Ahoy's Snifter of Terror anthology features Edgar Allan Poe stories on steroids, and they're already pretty steroidal. So I picked the story Berenice, which features some delicious body horror, and we just
Hmm.
had so much fun. Berenice is a story about teeth, and
Hmm.
so Alan and I would just see, the thing that's so great about Alan is I will ask him to do things that would make another artist tear his hair out or pull his teeth out, and Alan is just yeah, you want teeth everywhere, you want teeth in the bed. Like, it was a canopy bed and I
Hmm.
wanted there to be it to resemble teeth, and we wanted to work in teeth everywhere. And I think that, in part, Alan and I have similar old loves. I used to love Plop, which was a DC magazine that had a lot of Sergio
Yeah.
Aragonis, little strange doodles in the sidelines. And
Hmm.
um, I loved a lot of the old EC and DC horror. And
Hmm.
so, again, I mean, I know, because I've worked with other artists who've said, you evil bitch, in a kindly way, I'm sure.
Yes.
But but Alan enjoys the torture. It's
Hmm.
it's the perfect pairing of sadist and masochist, really.
Hmm. So, so listeners, I now because if you have not read Guilt yet, or picked up the first issue, and I ran this by Alisa before because I think so. There's two panels in there that made me laugh out so loud, and
We're going to ruin them for you.
yeah. No, it didn't ruin them for me. It was like, oh yeah, but
Wait, let me just say, I don't know who's listening. Maybe you have never opened the wrong medicine cabinet or the wrong drawer. Maybe you've never accidentally said, "Oh my God," and come across something that belonged to your parents and made you have to look at them in a whole different light. But if you never have, then this may not make you laugh. This may just make you, vomit a little in your mouth. But hopefully there will be both laughter and bile.
And also too, I have to add too, it's like also too, if your parents always keep their bedroom door for adult kids, if your parents keep their bedroom doors closed, just leave it closed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that we all end up discovering, some surprising things about our parents at some point. I think that a lot, so I'll talk for a second about humor without hopefully ruining the whole. I mean, it is sexual, and it is raunchy, and there are gross moments. I love body horror. I just want to say that if you look at one through line through a lot of my writing, there's usually some body horror, gross out humor. And I I think that with humor, and I think about humor all the time, and I can be, unfortunately, if you talk about food, you can still make things sound appetizing, but if you talk about humor, it's very unfunny. But I'm fascinated by humor, so I'm gonna dissect it. A lot of humor is about timing and the nuances of intonation or acting. And in a comic, the acting has to do with the subtle expressions and micro expressions and how the artist and the writer pace things. And
Yes.
so the fact that some people are finding me funny in comics has a lot to do with the collaboration, because I just don't know how anyone who isn't their own artist manages to be funny unless there's this great synergy with the artist.
Mhm.
Terry Moore is one of my favorite creators, Strangers in Paradise and Rachel Rising and Echo and a million other wonderful things. And I kept thinking, how will I ever convey the kind of humor and drama in my writing
Hmm.
and in my stories that Terry Moore does? Because I can't draw, not like that. And so the partnership with Alan just really made it possible for me to, do what Terry does because
Yes.
he is both writer and artist.
Hmm. And I'm gonna add on to that because um, Alan's art, I not only does incredible detail, especially with the Bella set building, the apartment building. Oh my God, that's beautiful. But also capturing now, listeners, I've never been to New York. But I've been to the East Coast. I've seen the fall. But well, let me get to the point. Is that when I see that scene in 1973 of New York, it captures the feel of this is New York back in the 70s. During the fall, it's great. The other thing I love about Alan too is that he's able to convey emotions through some of the facial expressions. Um, there is one scene, and it takes place and there's a lot, but one key scene I love. I think it was in issue number 3, and I'm not spoiling anything, but there's a scene where someone comes up to Hildy and goes, you need to meet with the co-op. This is your letter. This is your warning. And she's in the airport smoking this cigarette, and she's saying something like, "What I haven't got, blah blah blah." But just the expression on her face, like, I don't care what you're saying. Don't bother me. It's so great. It is.
It's so great in part because that is what Alan loves to draw.
Mhm.
And I had an artist who, after Alan left and before Mike Norton, who, also did an amazing job with Mystic You, but there was another artist that we were considering, and he just said, after taking one look at my script, like, oh my God, what a boring writer. There are
Mhm.
no, where are the fisticuffs?
Yeah.
And and I do have some fisticuffs. I actually do have physical humor. I
Mhm.
like physical humor. I like body horror, as I said. But if a long drawn out fight is what you love to draw,
Mhm.
then I'm not fun. What I adore are those weird, glances and as I say, those little reactions that go back and forth.
Mhm.
And Alan thinks about that stuff as closely as I do. So B. Arthur was one of the inspirations for Hildy, a little Rosalind Russell, a little
Mhm.
B. Arthur. And B. Arthur was an amazing reaction actor. So one of the things that, is great to watch with Maude, which was her series before Golden Girls and
God,
Golden
yes.
Girls, is watching her reactions to, say, Betty White's
Mhm.
characters' pronouncements. And so to not just be able to draw well, and I think people talk about, what
Mhm.
it means to draw well, but to be able to catch uh those golden moments. So I learned only recently that in animation, there's something called the golden pose. So the golden pose is the pose that they achieve in animation. So let's say the big pose is, I don't know, the baboon Rafiki
Mhm.
holding up Simba.
Oh
And
yeah.
so the series of poses that lead up to this big golden pose. Whereas in comics, you're kind of going straight to the golden pose and
Mhm.
you want that feeling of motion inside that held pose.
Mhm.
So Alan is, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on about the
That's
art.
fine. No, no,
It's a
please.
visual medium. And so yes, I've obviously I did a lot of work, but the thing that people can't see in this podcast is Alan's contribution, which is so, so important.
It it very much is. And you know, Alisa, don't worry about that because um the thing about Alan's artwork is it's very beautiful, it's well detailed, and I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit because um you know um listeners, if you do pick up the trade, sometimes you have to look in the background because there's some panels where it there's little things that contribute to the story to that.
Oh, yes. So the part of what Alan and I love, and part of what I think, comics can be expensive,
Yes.
especially, trades and getting all the floppies. And so, we both worked really hard to make this a comic worth rereading. So
Yes.
hopefully you read it once and you say, oh, okay. And then you look back and you catch a lot of things that you might not have caught the first time. And
Hmm.
it's part of us, I guess, really wanting to give, value for money.
It really does. And listeners, I probably repeat this again. It's because um, you know, because I want to reread this story again. Because and let me take a step back. Sorry, because I think it was in issue 2. I'm not going to tell what panel, but but Hildy and Trista, um, not only did they cross paths in 1973, but if I remember correctly, I think they also crossed paths in 1980s or the 90s.
Yeah.
But I remember reading that second issue and I had to go, wait a minute, didn't they? And I had to go
Yes.
back again.
Oh, okay, so part of my inspiration for doing that, I was, working on my Sandman podcast
Hmm.
while writing this, and at a certain point, Neil Gaiman and I are still in touch, and we worked together on the Norse Book of Mythology.
Hmm.
I was the doula for that book, and so Neil said, "Do you want to look at the scripts again?" I hadn't kept my Sandman scripts, and so he sent me the original scripts, and it reading the comics again and reading the scripts reminded me how much Neil put in
Hmm.
and how many little, hints of stories that, you felt like you could add water and have whole other stories going in whole other directions.
Yes.
And it really, I mean, I did it in a very different way, but it was a wonderful reminder about how much you can cram into the phyllo pastry of a comic.
Yes. And I'm going to say, please don't take this wrongly, but you and Alan it balanced out. It's a
Mhm.
nice balance because sometimes because you don't want to cram too much in a panel and then things can get lost.
Yeah,
But
you
it's
want
a
it to
nice,
be clear. You want it to
yes,
feel relaxing to look at and not make your eyeballs vibrate.
yes. Um, let's see. I'm just trying to. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to.
I've bounced around a little. I've probably
No, no, no.
sent
But
us
this
all
is
over the place.
no. But this is great because this is great. And just thank you. Just thank you very much for doing this. Um, let's see.
I know one of the things, if I'm recollecting, that you wanted to talk about was some of the other odd pop culture influences.
Yes.
So as I say, I'm always influenced both by the deeply embarrassingly personal and the deeply embarrassingly pop culture. So a lot of people remember the spoof movie Airplane.
Hmm.
And what people these days may not remember as clearly is Airplane came after a whole bunch of disaster movies
Yes.
uh, featuring airplanes, airport, I think
Yes.
1970 and on and on.
Hmm.
There was basically almost one a year until
Yeah.
1979 when
Yes.
there was
Because the
airport.
1970 Airport 79 Concorde with George Kennedy. The
Yes.
oh that's oh my God. Now yes, listeners, just buckle in because this will probably be a long episode. But um oh shoots the supersonic plane. The
Yes,
Concorde.
the Concorde, there was a super. So, okay. So, first of all, I was a huge fan as a kid of disaster movies. At age 7, which
Hmm.
was inappropriately young, I was taken in to see the Poseidon Adventure.
Oh my God.
And okay, so the Poseidon Adventure, which is about a cruise ship that gets turned upside down, uh, is one of my lifelong favorite guiding principles. It's
Hmm.
because to me, while being deliciously camp,
Hmm.
it's also about paradigm shift.
Hmm.
And if you could come to my house, I have not one but two framed, Poseidon Adventure themed pictures.
Nice.
But while, like, either right before or right uh, during writing Guilt,
Mm-hmm.
I began to have this intense urge to rewatch every airport movie. And I began to think, there's nothing more 70s than an airplane. And I also, so when Trista and Hildy go through the portal together,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of mess up the space-time continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was thinking about all of the time travel things I've loved. There used to be a British TV show not that long ago. I mean, not 70s long ago, but it was called Primeval. And there's these
Yes.
rips space-time continuum, and there's dinosaurs rushing
Mm-hmm.
through. And I thought, well, I don't want dinosaurs. That's not right for this. But if there is a rip in the space-time continuum, what would get lost?
Mm-hmm.
And so I began to think about an airplane and what would
Yes.
happen with an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, there's so many things to say about my airplane subplot, but at first it was going to be a throwaway. Now, I need to say, some writers are plotters. They
Mm-hmm.
have carefully detailed outlines
Mm-hmm.
and they've got index cards, they use Scrivener. Some writers are what we call pantsers. They go by the seat of their pants. They
Mm-hmm.
discover as they go along.
Yes.
I am a plotzer.
Mm-hmm.
I attempt to plot and then I pants and then I go back.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of plotzing with this, and I thought that I was just going to have a little throwaway reference to an airplane, and it's one of those places where Tom Pyre really came in and he said something along the lines of, "I was very interested in that airplane," and you're just gonna drop that,
Mm-hmm.
and that subplot became much more integral and interesting, and it I guess it delighted the child in me. And one of the things as an editor, I often say to writers is, if you are writing for a reader, even if that reader is just the you that would be reading this if you hadn't written it,
Mm-hmm.
you usually it is more fun because you're writing. Oh, I don't know. I think as a writer, if you're writing something because you want to write it and express yourself, it
Mm-hmm.
is much less successful than if you're writing what you would want to read. It's a better way to go, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that I'm babbling now. I'll try to
No,
stop.
no, it's all right. I I'm gonna go a little off the cuff because for younger listeners, if you have never seen because if you've never seen the airport series, oh my god, because I mean these are like disaster movies were so big in the 70s. I mean, we're talking like with with major movie stars. I mean, we're going with Earthquake, Towering Inferno, but the airport series, I love it. Airport 75, Charlton Heston. That's all. I'm going to leave it at that.
But and Charlton Heston and Burt Lancaster kind of make little cameos or characters that look a bit like them.
Yes.
But I have to say that I don't know how it will seem I mean, my own kids, who are 24 and 27, they grew up watching 70s disaster films because I
Uh-huh.
felt it was a very important part of their education. But I think for a lot of kids, we didn't have the special effects. It's
Yes.
not like it's not like Titanic, let
Yeah.
alone, like all the CGI.
Mhm.
And so what you have is a lot more character emoting. It would,
Mhm.
it's you would have some ancient creaky star,
Mhm.
crying and sweaty, and they're also steeped in kinds of casual sexism and
Oh yes.
some
Yeah.
well, every kind of ism that we
Mhm.
don't like so much. And so you have to both sort of forgive them and view them as an artifact of their time.
Yes.
And that said, I still find the disaster movies of the 70s more interesting because they take the time to make you care about the characters.
Mhm.
Whereas the later disaster films seem to be much more glorying in special effects for special effects' sake.
Mhm. I have to say, I still think I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff, but I still love Airport 77 when the plane goes in the water. I mean, that was an all-star. I mean, major all-star.
That's the Karen Black one, right?
No, Karen Black was the Airport 75. That was the
Okay.
one where um the stewardess, the what was it? The small plane, the pilot suffers a heart attack, um, literally
And they have to get the
flips.
helicopter. Yes.
Yes,
I was very
yes.
influenced by
And Karen
Airport
Black is the
75.
stewardess trying to fly the
Karen Black was a very under I don't think people remember her anymore. She
Yes.
was a great dramatic actress and and an imperfect beauty, which we don't see as much anymore. So
That's
I
true.
like
Yes.
she looked um ever so slightly cross-eyed, which is
Yeah.
just a wonderful thing.
Oh
You know,
yes.
I love everyone seems more conventionally pretty in the movies these days.
No, but that's true. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going now. I'm babbling, but see now I'm going down a rabbit hole. But did you remember watching the TV movie with her in it, Tales of Terror?
Yes. Oh my God.
Oh
Wait, the voodoo, the little
yes! Oh my
the
God!
yes.
Yes!
Oh God, that was incredible. Also, I mean, what I'm referencing in part with all of these are the Mad Magazine satires, because back in the day you would have, was it Mort Drucker who was drawing the satires, I
I want
think?
to say yes.
We'll have to check in the notes, but I think it was, and you know, so you would get these gloriously irreverent satires of including some very adult movies in Mad Magazine.
Yes.
But I think that, so I guess what Alan and I were thinking of and referencing was in part the movies themselves and in part the Mad Magazine delicious renderings of them. And I just want to say that at the same time as all of this stuff is going on, I tried not to lose the sense that these are characters that I care about.
Yes.
And these are, you know, the situation at the heart of it isn't funny. It's hopefully the treatment of it is funny. But
Yes.
at core, you know, so the other influence that I had on this, I just will say, is a show that's much more modern, Fleabag, because I thought, God, you can be so funny and so real.
Yeah.
And Fleabag and Russian Doll and more modern shows are showing how you can toggle back between nostalgia and raunchiness and stuff that's emotional and more resonant. So those were, I'm not saying I succeeded, but those were all of the strange ingredients in my stew.
Okay. No, but thank you very much. Um, Actually, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna yeah, I'm gonna start moving along. Sorry. Um, um, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to phrase. I didn't know how to phrase this question. I'm just gonna ask it out. Is that
Blurt it, blurt it.
um? So how did you get that quote from? Well, we know that you keep in contact with Neil. So how did you get a quote from him? I mean, I'm sure you just emailed him.
Well, that is actually an older quote that was, it was what's called a traveling quote, because at one point Neil said, I'm going to give you a quote that you can absolutely use. He has been a very good friend in that way.
Yes.
He actually read Guilt, and I mean, he said to me personally that in a lot of ways, I think it's of the things I've written, it's his favorite. And he felt it was he said that he thought that of all the things I've written, it felt the most personal and the most me. And it really meant a lot. He also did say he felt like I'd packed 12 issues worth of content into about 5 issues. Um, no, but it was yeah, I still do have, you know, a really close relationship with Neil in that, you know, I'm still in contact. I do want to say that at one point, I remember that Neil had written another quote, and I remember there was some website that said, "Oh God, how did this writer get a quote from Neil?" And I guess, you know, I hope it was sour grapes, but I was thinking, ooh, backlash.
Yeah.
So but I mean, I think that, how can I say this? I I think that when it comes to the grand scheme of blurbing, people wonder how it works. And I
Mhm.
think it works that, on the one hand, there sometimes is a personal connection, but I
Yes.
think that by and large, people don't, don't want to give a blurb to something that they don't don't feel, you
Yes.
know, works for them at all.
Yeah.
Um, and but Neil is also a voracious reader. And there have been many times when I've read someone who is not as known to me. I'm trying to remember, Tender Morsels was a book I love. And now I'm trying to remember the name of the author. Um, Beautiful book, Tender Morsels, a sort of Snow White, um, Rose Red.
Hmm.
It's a different Snow White, not the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but Snow White Rose Red rendering. Beautiful book. And I discovered it and I thought I was being so original. And then I thought, oh, wait, what? Oh, there's a quote from Neil on it. And so a lot of times when I found someone who may not be as well known, I have discovered that Neil discovered them before me.
Hmm.
Who
And then
wrote
when
Morsels? I'm going to look this up while we're talking. Is that
yeah,
okay?
that's no problem. And then of course, as I mentioned that you worked at Vertigo Books, you worked with Karen Berger, and then and then um and then the Ford by Karen Berger. How did that happen?
So again, I worked, wait, I'm looking, it's Margot Lanigan who
Hmm.
wrote Tender Morsels, a wonderful book.
Hmm.
Just wanted to give that a
No,
shout out.
that's fine.
So, Karen, I started out as Karen's assistant editor,
Hmm.
um, and I worked on The Sandman. And in those days, so I was, I guess in my mid to late 20s, and Neil's just a few years older than I am. And he was working in England. And
Hmm.
so the end of my workday would correspond with his late night.
Hmm.
Uh, England's 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. And he was at that time in his life a very late night writer. And
Hmm.
so what would happen is, as everyone left the office, and the lower ranking you are, the later you end up working, if you know
Hmm.
what I mean. So I had, things to balloon and whatever. And Neil was up writing or had finished his writing. So it'd be maybe 6 o'clock my time and
Hmm.
midnight his. And we would get on the phone, we'd do some work, and then we would just end up talking because, he'd finished his work. I'd pretty much finished mine before kids and other
Yes.
responsibilities. And so both of those relationships with Karen and with Neil morphed from work relationships to work friendships and then continued even after I was no longer working.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of how it happened. And I think not to, I mean, again, I hope it's not just, my delicious cooking or whatever it is that has inspired these, but they're human relationships.
Hmm.
Um, what I got really excited by, so recently, just a week or so ago, I got to meet George R. R. Martin for the first time. And I have to, so, okay. So in Symphony Space in New York City, I saw that Neil was um, interviewing George R. R. Martin. And I said, okay, I'm just going to buy tickets and,
Hmm. Yes.
go, I'll
Yeah.
sit up close. And I took my son
Hmm.
and I said, maybe we can get backstage afterwards
Yeah.
and meet George R. R. Martin.
Hmm.
So, because I mean, obviously my family is very impressed by Neil Gaiman, but they met him. Um, Matthew even has, I think, like a silver teething ring that Neil sent when he was born. So anyway,
Oh,
we
that's
get to go backstage, and Neil says hello, and I said, I want to meet George R. R. Martin.
nice.
I didn't know how long I had, and we go over and we're introduced, and Neil describes how he knows me, and he starts to tell the story of, how I'm Robert Sheckley's daughter and how Neil discovered
Mhm.
that I was Robert Sheckley's daughter because both Neil and George R. R. Martin would know of my father.
Mhm.
And at one point, I can't say this for sure, but I felt that something in George R. R. Martin's eyes shifted, and he had what I felt, and I might have been projecting, was the unmistakable look of a man who has waited many, many hours for dinner. and that nothing, including the news that a meteor was heading for Earth,
Mhm.
would be more interesting than, please God, just having a bite to eat and maybe a drink.
Mhm.
So, but I did get to meet George R. R. Martin.
Oh, that is so cool.
My
That is.
hand has touched his.
Oh, but that is so cool. Um, Alisa, I'm gonna because I gotta slowly start wrapping things up because I don't want to keep you too long. So I'm gonna ask, and this is the part where I'm gonna ask two funny questions, and I'll start. Oh, actually, wait, before I go to those questions, before we start wrapping up guilt and before we start jumping to the podcast. So, and I'm gonna say, please feel free to give shout outs. I know you already gave a shout out to Alon. Who else helped you on this series?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Rob Steen, right, is
Yes.
I'm saying that right. He was such an amazing letterer.
Mhm.
He anytime that there was a little mistake, I realized it was mine.
Oh,
He was just amazing. Alan also did the colors.
okay.
Um, and that was just fabulous. We have a variant cover by Jill Thompson that is absolutely
Yes.
beautiful. And yeah, so as I said, Tom Peyer was the editor and just a brilliant editor.
Mhm.
Uh we he was such a brilliant editor that if you look closely, you might see a little ode to him in the comic.
Now, perfect segue because I am joking. Whose idea was it to have Dragonfly Man and Dragonfly to make a very unique cameo?
That was Alan. That was
Okay, all right.
the fact
Now-
that Alan makes a cameo was my idea.
Oh, okay. So now well, not only, and I think I'll get to my comments after. Now, let me, now I'm just joking. Now, did Tom, well, Tom makes as you mentioned, he makes a very unique cameo in the series. Um, Now, did Tom, quote unquote, give you a note in your script to make sure that he's in your story?
No, no, that was actually a little I think I'm trying to remember. I think we, as I say, there was a lot of decor in
Yes.
the series, and the at some point we are in the basement of the Bellicent, which was
Yes.
modeled very much on the basement of the building where I grew up, where there's over the years all the artwork that people have discarded in their apartments now lines the halls, but you also have, the old fallout shelter
Yes.
symbol. And so I think there was a throwaway painting. And I think I said to Alan, you don't have enough work to do. Instead of a throwaway painting, why don't we stick Tom Fire in there? Um, cross-dressed. And yeah, so Alan, as I said, things that would make another artist tear out teeth and hair and eyes just makes Alan go, yeah, cool idea. More work for me. Excellent.
But I have to say that was a very unique cameo, and it was great. No, it was really great. It was like, oh, that's a pretty cool way. That's a pretty cool way. Okay, now before I get to the endless, start asking a little bit questions about the endless Sandman podcast. I just want to say I really enjoyed Guilt. To me, this ranks up there with the best Twilight Zone episode. It does. It really does. This story has heart and soul. It has a lot of depth. And like you said, it's a story that you want to it makes you want to reread it again just to see the little nuances. And that's how, like, to me, you know, certain movies or certain shows, because it's the one, it's not only the nuances, but it's the characters. The characters are real. There's someone I can identify. We've already talked about it before. There's some laugh out moments. I mean, and it's great. But even with those laugh out moments, there's a little bit of a pain underneath there, and that's what I connected with some of with some of the characters. Um, the art is perfect, and then, like I said, Alon brings a lot of detail, and he conveys subtle emotions, and it's just it's I love it. And Alisa, I want to say this to you, after I read the series, you know, uh, and even like you said, how Neil said this is a personal story to you. To me, this is your love letter to your parents. So, listeners, when I did Elisa's background and so forth, like Elisa said, Hildy is loosely based on her mother Ziva. Um, Her father, who science fiction writer, he pitched stories to Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone, and actually, um, the main character in this one Twilight Zone episode called The Arrival, and that episode dealt with a missing plane. That main character's name is Grant Sheckley, you know.
Which freaked me out. As a kid, I was watching The Twilight
Yes.
Zone and suddenly saw that late at night. Absolutely freaked me out. And I just want to tell you, there is no higher praise for me. I am a huge fan of the original Twilight Zone series. Although I want to say something, I don't mean to be libelous, but this is what my mother said to me. She
Mhm.
said that back in the day, Rod Serling was known by the science fiction community to not always be such a safe source for submitting stories. Because sometimes the stories weren't accepted, but appeared anyhow.
We'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Again, I'm so sorry. Don't
No,
sue me. I don't know if it's true or not, but it is what my mom used to say.
no, yes, and uh, well, I'm just gonna say this, and like I said, my thing is I have no found evidence or anything, but I remember sort of rumors with Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek because because of
Know that.
because think about it because remember Harlan Ellison, that feud between Harlan Ellison and Gene Roddenberry.
Yes,
That's
yes.
why I'm
Now,
kind of
and I should say that Harlan Ellison was, someone. So Harlan Ellison once wrote an introduction to one of my father's books in which he basically just goes through what a schmuck my father was for not staying with my mother. He he obviously had a little crush on my mother. Uh, but yes. So, and I would like to say that in a very different way, I'm working on a new project now for Ahoy, and all I can say is my love of science fiction, some of uh, my love of science fiction and horror and Twilight Zone, all of that will definitely factor in.
okay, and I cannot wait to read that.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
no, yes, okay. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to continue because I don't want to keep you too long. The uh, so the Endless Sandman podcast, and then I'm just gonna give a brief thing for the listeners. So the first episode was aired on June 29th of 2021. There's roughly about 44 episodes, and it's hosted by you and New York Times best-selling novelist Lonnie Diane Rich.
That's
Now
right.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
sorry. So okay, I'm just gonna ask the question. Sounds dumb, but for new listeners, what is your podcast about?
So, I had this idea. Lonnie does wonderful podcasts about pop culture. She's done one about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The West Wing and other great shows. And she's not only a writer, but also a great story analyst and writing coach.
Hmm.
Um, she's got a great writing book out. But so I approached her and I said, I would love to do a podcast about the Sandman. First, start by rereading the comics.
Hmm.
I would be, drawing on my memories
Hmm.
of working on the comics, and you would be a first time reader. And then, we could go on to the Netflix series when it starts. And
Yes.
so that's exactly what we did. And we've been on a short hiatus. We are going to start up again. But yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. So we approach, I guess, me as someone who knows some of how the sausage was made,
Hmm.
Lonnie coming fresh to the table,
Hmm.
but also having an expertise in story. And so we talk a lot, about the comic and how comics work, and also what kinds of adaptations were made and changes were made from comic to the TV series.
Ah, that's so pretty cool. That is cool. All right. Final question. Any closing words to our listeners?
Oh gosh. I guess I would just say that I have been so very lucky to get this chance to write for Ahoy. It's a small company,
Mm-hmm,
and I think they are doing the kind of creator-owned projects and supportive creative teams that Vertigo used to do.
mm-hmm,
So, I mean, I'd love it if you bought Guilt,
mm-hmm,
because obviously that's my book. But really, there are so many amazing creators working for Ahoy.
mm-hmm,
There's Tom Pyre is a writer, and Stuart Moore are their writers, as well as editors and people who work behind the
mm-hmm,
scenes. There's work by Gail Simone, Mark Russell, who's
mm-hmm.
just, an amazing writer.
Yes.
So I would say, work, supporting small publishing houses helps them to keep going
Mm-hmm,
and put out more great work.
mm-hmm.
So hopefully, either, Guilt, or if something else is more your cup of tea, give it a try. Ahoy's a great publishing house.
Alisa, mahalo. Thank you in Hawaiian. Thank you for giving me another opportunity to interview you. I wish you all the success with the Guilt trade paperback. Um, I also want to give a big thank you to Hannah of Superfan Promotions for help setting up this interview. Hannah, thank you very much. If you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, please check out Guilt. It's from Ahoy Comics Magazine. To me, you know, Alyssa knows that this is this is my pick for the best series of this year. It is because there's a lot of layers to this story. To me, it's a great story about real characters going through real things about regrets, second chances, and hope. It's out in trade right now. I'm not being sarcastic. Please think about giving this, buying this as a Christmas present or a birthday present, to give to your comic book friends. And if you've never read an Ahoy Comics magazine, please check out this trade. Let this be the first trade you pick up. So if you guys get a chance, give Ahoy Comics, a chance. I love the stories that they produce. Again, Guilt is great. It to me the writing is really good, and the art by Alan is very good. I also want to thank Drew, the host of Comics for Fun and Profit. Drew, thank you very much for putting all your hard work behind the scenes, putting this episode together. If you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys. Aloha.
Time for a break from our show to pay the bills. Check out beacons.ai/comics fun profit for all the C4 FAP links you could ever need, all in one place. You can provide feedback, listen, support, share, enjoy these. We have our Patreon there. You can buy us a beer or a coffee. You can check out our Instagrams, our Twitters, our Facebooks. Check out our YouTube page. You can email us. You can listen to our podcasts on Patreon, if you're a subscriber, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on Podbean. We have Google Podcasts on there. We have an Amazon wish list. You want to buy Kyle and I something? Fine. You can do that here. We appreciate it. We have Kyle's RPG podcast listed on there, so you can check out his Dork Day Afternoon offerings. We have Cowabunga links, so you can check out the Cowabunga Deep Discount FOC and pre-order list. Get on that. That's RLCS, so you can check that out as well. And we want to just give you opportunities to say hi, to check out what we're doing, support us if you would like, or just listen. Check out beacons.ai/comics fun profit for all the C4 FAP links you could ever need. Thanks. Back to the show.